Seven Blue Skies channel presents a new Dr. Rifat Ismail adventure in Paranormal Book 7. Yes, Legend of the Cave Guard, by whom? Dr. Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq. I leave you to your narrator.
Finally, they all left. Now I can shut my office door on me and sit by the dim light of the lamp, sip my tea, and write you a new story. Do you remember me? It's me, old exhausted Dr. Rifat Ismail, who lives alone and will die alone some evening. I am the amateur ghost hunter, the tracker of new legends wherever they occur. Me, who battled the werewolf and was chased by the zombies, and held Medusa's head and... You may ask me, who are the ones who just left? No, guys, that was just a slip of the pen. Let's just say I would like to keep that secret for the time being. Or so as not to arouse your curiosity more. Let's just say there was no one here. Agreed? Maybe I will tell you more about that someday. Maybe after I recount my 30th or 40th or 100th adventure. As for telling it now, impossible. So let's leave that for now and return to the topic at hand. Shall I tell you today about my adventure with Dr. Lucifer, or my story about Braxa, the graveyard beauty, or my story with the Madeira? No, there's no need, because those stories do not suit my mood today. I shall tell you my story of the cave guard. When did this story take place? I actually don't remember, but it must have been after my meeting in Greece with the head of Medusa, and surely before my exposure to the Pharaoh's curse. It is a terrible tale, but you're lucky to be reading these events and not having lived them, and for that I envy you. Are you ready?
Okay, guys, we're going to Libya. Buckle your seatbelts, and while you're at it, go ahead and hit the subscribe if you haven't yet, and of course the sweet like, and leave us a comment for feedback. Really appreciate it, and will be taken in consideration. Cheers.
Okay, are your friends present and the lights turned on? Well then, let's go. 1. He's coming. When we noticed the clawed footprints in the moist sand, when we saw the line of blood still wet on the ground, tracing a crazy death dance, when we noticed the jacket torn as if an army of demons had run out of it, and when we saw the confusion and fright in the eyes of Professor Paolo, then, and only then, did we understand that the cave guard is real, and that it was free, and that it wanted us. The taboo men whispered, exchanging words in an accent totally unfamiliar to me but for a word or two. But one word reached my hearing. The Assas. The Assas. With some confusion, Professor Paolo asked me,
What does that word mean?
It means the guard. It's a proper Arabic word.
So they too are thinking of what we are thinking.
I lit my third cigarette, blew out smoke, and said, There's no other way of thinking as far as I'm concerned. And I kicked the sand with the toe of my shoe. The heat was stifling, and the rabid desert flies tried desperately to gnaw at my face, and the sweat poured from me. But I was oblivious to all of that. If the Assas really existed in this desert, or in this world at all, then we had no chance of surviving. But it wasn't over yet. We had to find Ahmed's corpse, or his wounded body, and then make our plan accordingly. The men had made their decision. In the evening, they brought him as the moon shone its face from behind the mountains. The professor and I were sitting next to the campfire when we noticed the men returning in a silent, gloomy march under the pink sunset. Per their customs, their faces were covered as usual, but their eyes spoke of danger and tension. And on the sands they threw the body and stood exchanging glances. With some uncertainty, I stood over the body and began examining it. The professor came and stood next to me, and I heard his sharp inhalation before he rushed away. With eyes averted as much as possible, Mahmoud asked me, "What do you think?" "As you see." "So, it's not the wolves?" I asked him to light a cigarette for me and to put it in my mouth. My 100th cigarette this terrible day. A cough lodged itself in my chest and my trachea constricted, but I had no clue what I was doing. "Of course it's not wolves. The wolf who did this is not yet born." With a shaky hand, Mahmoud took the cigarette from my mouth so that I could speak clearly, and I went on. "No wolf breaks its victim's neck and twists it in the opposite direction, and no wolf sucks its victim's blood, and no wolf ever leaves clawed footprints on sand." The professor drew near us, asking what we were talking about, so I told him in English. As for Mahmoud, he said a few words in Italian which made the professor's color pale. "The cave guard wants us. We have stirred its anger. We have awoken the sleeping giant, and we must pay the price." The leader of the group, Karim, approached us. Behind the scarf covering his face, his eyes shone with insistence and indescribable anger. "Mister, we have to go back." Immediately, Mahmoud's voice rang out as he translated in Italian what the man had said. And then Karim continued. "The Assas has moved, and our fathers have told us what that means. So, you see, we won't sleep or even rest until we're safe in our homes." The translation continued, and in the dancing light of the fire, the professor's face changed perceptibly, anger shining in his eyes. He shouted angrily, and Mahmoud translated his screams into Arabic sentences which he attempted to make angry-sounding. "But you've received your pay in advance." Coldly, Karim said, "We were paid to lead you to the caves. We weren't paid to help you enter them. And anyway, we don't want anything except to return to our children. We're asking you to return with us before doing so becomes an impossibility. This is not an honest deal." Growing angrier, he then touched his shotgun and said, "Hell itself despises he who betrays a trust. That's our motto. We are Tawarik." The insane professor had plucked a sensitive string for these men with his fit of angry Italian words having no limit, the norm for his countrymen. It was obvious that these silent, polite taboo would blow our heads off with their guns if we provoked them any further. "Professor, please, that's enough." I said this while lighting another cigarette and coughing. "Let them go. And let's go with them. We have seen all that should be seen. We're all tense, so don't complicate the situation even more." Rounding on me angrily, the professor exclaimed, "You and your chimney! I'm fed up with your carelessness, and your cowardice, and the smell of your cigarettes. Put out that cigarette, or this monster will find nothing to kill. And if you want to follow these taboo, go for it. I won't blame you. Go ahead, go." I almost replied to him with a shout befitting his rudeness, but I realized some kind of electricity filled the air which made everyone shout, so no need to add another spark to this tense situation. Without another word, I turned my back and linked arms with Karim. Surprised, the professor demanded, "Where do you think you're going?" "What a question. Following your orders, of course." The taboo disregarded his surprised look and mounted their camels as the animals' voices rose along with their bodies as they reached a standing position again. They placed Ahmed's mutilated corpse onto one of the camels. As for me, I got onto my own camel's back. And here started the nightmare as the creature went to stand up, throwing me to the front, then to the back, then to the front again. Fully standing now, the camel started walking slowly behind the convoy. They had buried the corpse, and there was no need to stay. "Cowards!" The professor's screams echoed as we left him and Mahmoud standing, staring after us in surprise. They stood alone next to the fire, lost in its dancing golden light, and the silent desert stretched out endlessly before them. And with the convoy, I drew farther and farther away until I could see no trace of them. For 10 full minutes, the image of them standing there alone in the desert plagued my mind. They awaited their mysterious destiny, and I realized this scene would disturb my sleep for several years to come. We had agreed on everything, and there was nothing new, so why retreat? This hesitation crawled insistently within my mind, and regret washed the traces of my anger. Thus, without a word, I pulled the camel's reins and started back to them. None of the men tried to stop me or dissuade me. They didn't even look back at me. These men firmly believe that the human being is the master of his own destiny, and that destiny does not change. And so, my camel started walking slowly, returning to the campsite where the fire threw its light on the sands. I will go through this whole adventure with them, and when it's over, we will simply direct our camels to one of the convoy's paths. We know these paths well now, and we have enough food and water. We have our weapons and ammunition, so what danger is there? That's what I told myself as I looked out into the dark desert from atop my camel. And as you expect, I was naive, unbelievably naive. What is more naive than leaving my secure place amongst those strong men and returning alone through the sands to the nightmare awaiting me? What is more naive than feeling the camel's hair standing up on the back of its neck, and its movement growing ever more nervous and, in spite of that, continuing on? Could I be more naive than to see the distant fire extinguishing suddenly and hearing the awful screams of a human being ripped apart, yet persuading myself it was only the sound of the wind? What's more naive than feeling my sixth sense screaming at me, "Go back! Go back! Please go back!" yet attributing this to my natural cowardice? When I reached the campsite, I found no one. The fire was out, sending gray smoke towards the sky. Weapons scattered about in the pale moonlight, and on the sand, footprints here and there, speaking of something abnormal. Something terrible happened here just a few minutes ago. I have to get off this camel and see what's up, but there's a small problem. I can't make the camel sit. Someone has to help me with this, or else I'll spend the rest of my life in this place. And even worse, if I jump down from the camel's back, I'll break my leg for sure. And even if that doesn't happen, how will I remount the camel if I want to leave? What's left for me is to call out as loudly as possible, "Mahmoud! Professor Paolo! Where did those two idiots go? And who put out the fire? And who was screaming?" I lit up another cigarette, feeling gratitude for my cleverness, which compelled me to bring along multiple packs of cigarettes on this trip. Something had happened, but I could not believe it was something bad. Bad things don't happen so quickly, as soon as the taboo turn their backs. So I have to find them or rush to catch up with the men before I lose their track. More screaming won't hurt. "Mahmoud! I hear you telling me, don't scream, don't let it hear you." And it's true, but I, as I have said, expected no evil. How could I have known those screams would give away my presence? Or that the smell of tobacco would bring the creature my scent? Or that the tenseness in the camel's muscles under me meant only one thing: it's him, and here he is coming for me, coming from the depths of hell, covered with darkness and the silver moonlight, the Assas. 2. The Lost Continent. But let us leave all this nonsense. Why would I waste my time and yours blabbering about topics which only interest me, when I actually plan to start this story telling you of my trip to Libya? As I have told you, I don't remember the exact year, or the reason for the visit. It must have been a scientific mission of some sort, and it must be this story took place when I had just returned from Greece after my tragic adventure with Medusa's head. I don't even remember the name of the hotel, but it was a comfortable hotel in Tripoli. After my mission, I spent 2 weeks there, and as usual, just like what happens in Sir Rider Haggard's stories, this story started in the smoking room. Of course, I mean the lobby of the hotel. I had made the acquaintance of a Libyan engineer named Mahmoud. He had just returned from a research trip in Italy, and the speed of healing of the deep wound left by the Italians on the kind people of Libya aroused my surprise. After the occupation starting in 1911, many heinous crimes were committed here. Mahmoud told me how the Italian general, that butcher Graziani, used a long rope to tie the people of Fezzan together and then throw them out of an airplane. Oh my God! I felt goosebumps crawling up my spine. Are humans really monstrous to that extent? The man who committed these acts is definitely a human like us, with a wife and kids, and gets headaches and diarrhea, and he loves fruits and summer nights. So what happened to him to turn him into a butcher? It's the fascism and racism, Mahmoud said. It turns a human into a bloodthirsty butcher. Any human. With his hand, he attempted to smooth his frizzy hair, the hair common to all of the sons of the Arab West. His was a dark-complexioned, thin face framed by mad, carefully unorganized hair. His eyes spoke of supreme sensitivity. He was very intelligent, and he told me bitterly, "We need science, and those people control the science now. That's why they overpowered us and tortured us. As for today, our sacred mission is to learn everything from them, all that they know. Thus I found nothing wrong in going to Italy to learn." I smiled, confirming his words. I myself had studied in England, a country which occupied my homeland for 70 years, and, like him, I found nothing shameful in doing so. "I think a lot of invaders came to your country," I suggested. He blew out cigarette smoke and smiled, saying, "A lot. In the old days we were occupied by the Spanish. We called them El Fendal. Then the Romans came, and in the 16th century the Turks, who ruled us under the notorious Basha el-Karmanli's family. Next came the Italians with their ominous ruling. All of those came and all of them left." He then narrowed his eyes and smiled deviously, saying, "And sometimes they say there were other invaders we don't know about." "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he said. "Just speculation and the talk of inexperienced scholars. But really, you've aroused my curiosity." Putting out his cigarette tensely, Mahmoud said, "Dr. Rifat, you're an educated man who has traveled a lot, so don't tell me you haven't heard about the plateau." "Which plateau?" With a loud, impatient voice, he replied, "The Tassili Plateau, of course." At a nearby table, a man sat regarding us with interest. A man in his 60s, clearly a foreigner. His face and limbs were unusually meticulous and symmetrical, like some kind of well-crafted mannequin. His dull face was devoid of wrinkles, with wide blue eyes betraying some amount of insanity. This man is a scientist. That's what I told myself, and I wasn't far off. This man was indeed a scientist, and the word Tassili had caught his attention, and he would definitely try to meet us and tell us terrible secrets about this plateau, thereby adding another nightmare to my nightmares. I guessed as much, and the man implemented this scenario to the letter. Here he is, standing up, approaching us, the bastard. He bows slightly, speaking Italian, and Mahmoud responds, inviting him to sit. Grabbing a chair, he rubs his hands together cheerfully and says in English, "The mister has asked me to speak in English so the three of us can understand each other. And it's my honor to make the acquaintance of two gentlemen like yourselves." Like most Italians, his English accent was funny. "My name is Paolo Giraldi, Professor Paolo Giraldi. I teach ancient history at the University of—" and I allowed myself to listen to your conversation, but could understand nothing from it except for the word Tassili, and it's quite remarkable that we should be thinking of the exact same thing at this same moment. When he finished talking, beads of sweat had gathered on his forehead, and his saliva spilled from his lips. A true madman, but he won't ruin my night. "Unfortunately," I said, "I know nothing about this topic, as I'm an Egyptian." "Ah, but all of you Arabs look alike." He then summoned the waiter, ordered 3 cups of cold orange juice, and went on blabbering unreservedly. "This plateau between Libya and Algeria contains one of the most mysterious riddles in human history, and it is said to be the undeniable proof of the existence of life on other planets." I sat up in my chair. This talk had taken a turn which interested me greatly, especially as I knew nothing whatsoever about this subject. While taking the first sip from his glass, Mahmoud commented, "That may be what they say, but the general belief is that hidden under this plateau is the mysterious continent of Atlantis." I startled, placed my hands on the table, and exclaimed, "Atlantis? You're joking, right?" "This is no joke," said the professor. "But Herodotus claimed it sunk into the Atlantic Ocean, and specifically in the expanse between Morocco and North America." Pushing his frizzy hair back, Mahmoud mumbled, "I don't know about that, but my understanding is that Herodotus claimed it was in the Great Desert, and that an earthquake swallowed it up." "That means," I said, "it's not a continent, it's a country." "Exactly." The Italian professor smiled sedately and remarked, "Anyway, there are a lot of theories and doubts about Atlantis, one being that geologists found no trace of an earthquake in the Great Desert. Thus, there could not be a continent under the sands." He then thought for a second and continued, "Since my field of study is ancient history, the story of Henry Lott captured my attention. In his expedition in 1956, he led a convoy of scientists who discovered ancient paintings on the cave walls. And with atomic analysis, they discovered that the paintings were made 20,000 years ago. Imagine, 200 centuries. 200 centuries ago, there was a civilization whose people already knew how to draw. And it's not an exaggeration to say that, for this reason, I came to Libya." He then smiled bitterly and said, "It's the truth, the priceless truth which will give science immeasurable flexibility. The truth." Here I swallowed hard. Where had I heard this sentence before? Was this a case of déjà vu, which makes us imagine we have lived a situation before and heard the same words before? Or had I really heard this before? Ah, Dr. Richard Cummings. He said it to me one day about 10 years ago as we stood in front of Dracula's mummy. The same words, and the same crazed look in the eyes. With a somewhat cold tone, Mahmoud remarked, "But that's just speculation." "Speculation?" the professor shouted tensely. "Well then, what if it turns out to be true? Mysterious paintings in an ancient cave drawn 200 centuries ago, and the paintings depict spacemen and flying men. What exactly would make us understand? A UFO landing here with green men who have antennae and carry laser guns?" I cleared my throat, deciding to trust my instincts and have my say, which would definitely not please this crazy guy. But I would go mad if I held back. "Listen, Professor," I said, "you know the idea of people living on other planets is total nonsense." "Nonsense?" "It's just an endless point of intrigue for scientists, and crazy rich people, and sci-fi filmmakers who suffer from a financial crisis, and—" "Financial?" the professor demanded. Luckily, I don't understand Italian, as a load of profane swears fell on my ears, swears which made Mahmoud's face turn as red as tomato soup, and made everyone in the lobby stare at me curiously, as if I were sitting there naked. But because I didn't understand Italian, I sat there calmly with just a light, sarcastic smile playing at the corner of my mouth. "So you don't believe in the existence of sentient being on other planets?" Unfazed, I answered, "Sentient or not, there's nothing." Mahmoud looked at me in wonder and muttered, "This is weird. Dr. Rifat, you told me you are interested in the secrets of the paranormal, and that you have a lot of experience in these matters." "I have experience," I replied, "but each time I was forced to get involved in these things, and I still think it's stupid to waste time and money on something like that when life is already full of useful mysteries which deserve and are likely to be explained logically. For example, why do we get cancer? Why is the flu vaccine ineffective? Why is Africa going barren? And how can we stop the pollution of the atmosphere? This is the only field where questions are useful. I mean, can you tell me the benefit of knowing there are ancient cave drawings of alien creatures? Would you find answers for your questions? And even if you found them, what's the use in that?" I lit a cigarette nervously and continued, "Life is complicated enough, and it's unwise to submerge ourselves in speculation and unanswerable questions, as long as there are other useful questions which we have answers for if we simply put in the effort. For a few moments there was silence except for the sound of our breathing. Then Paolo asked, "Are you finished?" "Not exactly. I have met a lot of crazies, one of whom tried to bring Dracula back to life, one who tried to prove that the Loch Ness Monster really existed, and one who tried to prove that Medusa was not a myth. And then what? What did humanity gain, and what did I benefit from all of this? Nothing. Just hours of tension and fright and sleepless nights, and black memories." Dr. Paolo's eyes shone with curiosity, and it seemed to me he had forgotten what he said before. With keenness, he started asking me about all I had just said, when and how and where I knew about these myths. I told him rather coldly, "Once again, Professor, I can assure you I'm not a legend maker. Actually, I'm a destroyer of legends, if that expression flies." I went on speaking until midnight as they listened, half amazed and half skeptical. And when the clock struck midnight, Mahmoud yawned and said he had to get some sleep, and I agreed. As for the professor, he was lost in daydreams, and I had the distinct impression that my stories gave him some idea. Our conversation about the caves of Tassili was amputated, not yet over, but he would surely return to the subject tomorrow. Thus I returned to my hotel room to get some rest before starting a new week, for though he had the health to stand all this blabbering, I didn't have the health to listen. In my room, I started writing a letter to Hoeda. Do you remember her? Alexandria, and my visit to Adel and his wife and her sister, and so on. When I met her, I was involved in a nightmare of a suspected cannibal, and I had no idea I was about to get involved with a real cannibal. But let's not jump events. Dear Hoeda, I write you this letter from my hotel room, and my longing for you is killing me because your beautiful memory never leaves me, and... What is this BS? Newspaper sellers write better and more tender and less phony letters to their servant girlfriends. These were just words, as the longing was not killing me, nor did I remember her face in the first place. I was merely trying to mold myself into a contrived state of love, knowing it was my duty to the one who would someday be my wife. Plus, a man in his 40s should write more eloquent letters than those written by a 14-year-old boy. I was tearing up the silly letter when there came a knock at the door. "Come in," I called. But he didn't come in. That means he didn't understand me. And since he didn't understand, that meant he wasn't Arab. And since he's not Arab, it was... "Come in, Professor," I said as I straightened up in my chair. The man entered wearing obnoxiously colorful summer pajamas. He held a razor blade, and his face was covered with foam. So he was in his room shaving his beard in his PJs when... "An unusual idea came to me," he remarked with mad enthusiasm. I shook my head in agreement, saying, "Obviously. You know the Tassili Plateau?" "Well," I said dryly, "what were we talking about all night?" "We're going there." "What?" "Yes," he exclaimed. "Me, you, and Mahmoud. A re-exploration. I have an historian's experience, and you're an expert in the paranormal, and Mahmoud is from Fezzan, where the plateau is located." His eyes shone in true hysteria as he said, "It'll be the most beautiful experience of your life." 3. Let's see. Professor Paolo, I think I made it quite clear that I'm not at all interested in this subject, clear to a level of rudeness. "But you don't understand," he cried, while moving to my bed and sitting without invitation. "It's the riddle of riddles, the secret of secrets. It's the charmed mirror which will transport us to another world, a different dimension." "Dimension?" I replied. "Of what size?" And I lit a cigarette and then grabbed one of my shoes and started polishing it, saying, "Okay, we reach the caves and descend until we reach Atlantis, where we find an entire city scientifically advanced, and where the beautiful queen falls madly in love with me. And then an earthquake demolishes everything, and the whole civilization is buried once again, yet we survive. Isn't that what you expect? And then what? I need companions on this trip, witnesses, and you and your miscreant friend are perfect for the job. I thought you were highly educated and brave. And you were wrong. I'm an ignorant coward. Is that enough for you to leave me alone? And here, for the first time, I began to fear this man, as when I lifted my eyes towards him, I noticed sweat covering his forehead, his whole body trembling, and a crazed look in his eyes. From between his teeth he made a low hiss, stating, "Dr. Riffat, I'm not used to being told no. When Paolo Giraldi wants something, he gets it, and others can only show their reluctance. You will take this trip." Before I could find an appropriate response, the door closed behind him. He had left me alone holding a shoe and a brush, and shaking. When I told Mahmoud of the conversation from the night before, he seemed happy. He clapped his hands together cheerfully and laughed to the point of shortness of breath. He remarked, "You opened an irresistible subject for that madman. Your stories exceeded his imagination, and he couldn't bear it. So, quickly enough, his hidden desire sprang on him, which is to see you and me and himself in an adventure through the desert to discover the unknown." "Problem is," I said, "he threatened me." "Ah, he's still laboring under the delusion of the Italian imperial complex. That's what this is really about." We were sitting next to each other in comfortable chairs in the hotel lobby, sipping on fragrant tea and checking the available newspapers when the professor appeared. He seemed exhausted after the long night he had undoubtedly spent drawing up hundreds of plans and discovering the secrets of the universe. And without a word he approached us and, rubbing his hands together, intrusively pulled up a chair. He ordered some tea and then said, "I have prepared everything. We leave tomorrow." Mahmoud and I exchanged looks. This madman spoke as if we had no will or opinions of our own. What does he want from us? "Professor Paolo," I started, "I thought you understood what I told you last night." With desperation, he shouted, "But I've studied everything. Everything. Hundreds of probabilities, and maps and articles describing this plateau. You have nothing to lose. I came to Libya for this purpose, but I'm an old man and in dire need of both of you." Nudging Mahmoud to start moving away, I said tensely, "No one goes on a trip like this as a favor. Don't you understand?" The professor mumbled his acceptance, and he sat back in his chair, a broken and finished man. Did he finally understand there was no use in pressuring us? My life in this hotel had become hellish, as the crazy professor followed me everywhere, insistent and tempting me, and explaining the plan for the trip. A whole week passed in such misery, and I felt the only solution was for me to leave Libya. I could leave the hotel, but I was otherwise quite comfortable there. I could kill the professor, and I would enjoy every second of it, but I did not fancy ending my life on the gallows. Gradually, and under this heavy pressure, I started to feel the idea was not so bad. Why not? At least I would see with my own eyes all that had been seen so far by the explorers who returned safely. No one spoke of the existence of vampires or ghosts or mythical creatures in that place. Therefore, my special talent of going into disasters would not play a big role on this trip. Also, Mahmoud was a sane and reasonable man, and with him I would learn a lot about this, my part of the world. The professor is quite mad, but he is amusing, and I enjoy those amusing mad scientists. So why would I refuse? True, the man had threatened me, and pride had made me refuse to the bitter end, but what did I care about this small man's threats to me? And how could a crazy man really insult me? And so that evening I went to the Italian's room and told him I agreed to go with him on this miserable escapade. As I stood next to the window, I stared out at the sand dunes and cacti dotting the desert, thinking of what awaited us. In a voice loud enough to overcome the whirring of the engine, Mahmoud told me, "What are you saying?" Bringing his mouth close to my ears, his frizzy hair flying crazily, he yelled, "This part of Libya is comprised of a wide plateau, a huge barren desert devoid of life. as there are no coastal mountains to gather and disperse rain like in Tunisia and Algeria. Then, glancing out the window, he shouted, I can't hear you. But it's my country, and I love it, he yelled back. The plane's engine roared, almost piercing my eardrums. The only propeller spun crazily at the front as the Libyan pilot, Ahmed El-Idrisi, sat at the controls. Next to him, the professor droned on endlessly in enthusiastic Italian sentences. We had rented this plane from one of the abandoned airstrips the Italians had built near Sebha, a forgotten, unknown airfield. It was the only airplane we had found there, but at least it was airworthy and unlikely to break down, God willing. At that time, foreign powers still held some residual authority in Libya. Thus, Fezzan had remained under French and British influence, and Tripoli under Italian control, while the U.S. retained its one airbase, which changed names to Uqba ibn Nafa after the September Revolution. Thus, before flying, the professor acquired authorization from the French authorities controlling Fezzan, and he recruited the capable Libyan pilot whose reputation preceded him. And here we are, approaching the Tassili Plateau near the Libyan-Algerian border. This place I knew nothing about just 1 week ago. We had weapons, food, and water in sufficient supply, along with some digging and climbing equipment and a camera. And I had brought along many packs of cigarettes, just in case, as well as some useless medications. While checking the bags, I asked Mahmoud, What? He shouted. How will this pilot land in the desert? Is there a landing strip? Of course not. Otherwise Henry Lott would have used it. He's hoping to find a good place to land on the sand. The blood rushed to my head. You two are nuts, you and the professor, I shouted. And it seems like this pilot is no better. The plane will definitely get stuck in the sand and never fly again. The pilot said he's going to try not to let that happen. What could I say or do? And what kind of bind have I thrown myself into now? But I tried to not jump to conclusions. Instead, I said in a loud voice, Well, anyway, this plane will never make it. What makes you say that? Because, I answered, single-engine passenger planes always crash in the worst places, the sea or the desert. And the worst thing is that the passengers survive only to face an even worse situation. Having overheard my shouting, the professor turned around in the co-pilot's seat to ask me why we were shouting. So Mahmoud came close enough to his ear to explain my theory, a theory he did not fancy, and so gave me a harsh look and turned his back to us in disgust. The desert slept lazily under us, showing us a part of its ugly, pockmarked face every other second. Leaning close to my ear, Mahmoud shouted, The Great Desert makes up 1/4 of Africa. As for what you can see now, this is the Hamadi Ubari oasis. Next we'll be crossing over Hamada Morzak, then Nemat. And he aimed at the vast sands and shouted, The Sea of Sand! It's 160 kilometers wide, and beware to the one who finds himself there. Like us? He gave me a fiery look to dispel my pessimism while attempting to smooth his frizzy hair. Just then, the sputtering started. At first it was unclear, but gradually grew louder, and I knew this sound came from the engine, the plane's only engine. The spinning of the propeller became irregular, and the engine's roar grew louder. The pilot abandoned his calm and steady posture, and his ears reddened, indicating a definite problem. Cursing in unintelligible Italian, the professor turned, shaking with anger, and screamed in my face. What are you saying? He leaned close to my ear and shouted again. I said, Are you happy now? The engine has failed. And here the roar of the engine had stopped, and we could once again hear each other as clear as day. I wish I had kept my mouth closed. 4. The Sea of Sand. If this were a movie, this scene would contain several successive shots, each not more than a half second, pieced together by a talented film editor who would then add in the sound effects, screaming and crying and moaning, and he might even add a crescendoed soundtrack foretelling the end. The scenes would go as follows: the engine stopping, a plane going down quickly, lips murmuring fervent final prayers, wide blue eyes, a hand pulling the control stick frantically, sweat on the forehead, the desert nearing quickly, the plane skidding, a hand pulling hard at the controls, a childish hand trying uselessly to grasp the glass porthole, flying eyeglasses, the velocity increasing madly, and then the scenes shorten: hand, controls, plane, eyes, desert, engine, a bald man searching for his glasses, me of course, and finally the sand filling the screen and fade to black. Yes, the theater audience would witness such scenes. In reality, suffice it to say the plane had crashed, and that the pilot succeeded in landing the plane semi-horizontally. Therefore, the damage was not severe. The sands buried half of the fuselage, which barely absorbed the impact. We had survived, but what now? After half an hour of pushing away tons of sand from the door, we managed to escape the plane. The professor boiled with anger, and he screamed in my face while brushing the sand off his clothes. "Did you see that, you jinx? If it weren't for your pessimism, this would not have happened." I replied coldly, "On the contrary, the pessimist expects evil and finds it or something better. So he takes every possibility into account and doesn't believe in luck. As for the optimist, he always expects good, and that's a hard thing. Therefore, the pessimist finds something better than expected in every situation." "And what is better than expected this time, you damn philosopher?" Running my hand over my head, I said, "I don't know, but none of us was hurt in the crash, and that's a point in our favor. We have to be in good shape when the wolves attack." "Wolves?" he spluttered. "Of course. It's inevitable. If you don't see wolves, you would feel there's some kind of trick." I went on, "And there also must be thirst, and a mirage." I think the reader can guess what the professor said next: heinous Italian curses, about which I was blissfully unaware, though I guessed their meaning from the reddening of Mahmoud's ears. And as for the reddest ears of all, they belonged to the pilot, Ahmed, who clambered over the sand dunes, kicking himself for a situation in which he had no real fault. What a bind! Where are we? How will we get back? After consulting the compass, Mahmoud explained, "No doubt we're somewhere near Nemat, and that means we're almost there. We'll have to walk from here, but quickly." In serious tones, the professor asked, "But in which direction?" "Of course, to the southwest," Mahmoud explained, "in the direction of the border and, maybe, the plateau. And hopefully we'll meet a caravan along the way." Taking a seat on the hot sand, I said, "Meaning it would be dangerous to leave the plane, for that can provide shelter and shade." Mahmoud gave me a cold look and murmured, "Would you rather stay here until the sun bleaches your bones? No one knows where we are and won't look for us." And with that, we began retrieving our supplies from the plane: food, weapons, water. Don't forget the water, for within 24 hours a drop of it would be more precious than jewels. I didn't forget my cigarettes, and we started our trek across the sands. Ah, how ugly is this desert! That steady, unchanging scene, the sands, the distant mountains, the cacti. The sand is not vivid yellow as it appears in pictures. It's actually a bleak gray, and as you near the mountains on the horizon, you realize they are not mountains but rather high, sandy dunes over the tops of which you can walk. And on the horizon, you see new mountains. Drudgery. Monotony. That's what the desert means to me. The horizontal sun fills your vision with colorful balls, and on the sands, you see hundreds of suns, thousands, millions, all of them pouring their rays onto you, and your feet sink in, sink. Your skin burns without the cooling sweat, and I fell to the ground, moaning, "I can't continue. Leave me to die and go." Annoyed, the professor came over to me and said, "Tell me, don't you find it strange that you get so sick after only 2 hours?" 2 hours? Only 2 hours? I thought we had been walking for 3 days. Oh my gosh. Then I'm still facing loads of this torture before I die. Handing me the canteen, the professor remarked, I understand your weakness. As soon as you crash in the desert, after 3 minutes you think it's your duty to die out of hunger and thirst and exhaustion. But let me assure you, I understand all of these psychological games, so don't play with me. I drank the water eagerly, feeling I was living the most miserable hours of my life. The professor's psychological state was rather unfazed, and afterwards I learned that he had been in the siege of Tobruk during World War II, so the desert couldn't exhaust or frighten him easily. He walked ahead of us proudly, behind him Mahmoud and Ahmed, and then me, an example of misery and torment. The color of the sand had clearly changed. Mahmoud stopped for a second, thinking, and then called out to the professor, begging him not to go any farther. From the ground he picked up a heavy rock and threw it about 15 meters away, and instantly the rock disappeared. So, it's quicksand. As if we needed that. The surface of quicksand is more consistent and softer than the surrounding sand, and easily observable to a trained eye. Nervously, the professor shouted, But this is very dangerous. We have to find a way around this area. Biting his cracked bottom lip, Mahmoud replied, No need for that. We can train our eyes and walk cautiously, avoiding the extra soft sand. We'll walk in formation so that none of us sinks without the others noticing. He then lifted his finger in warning, saying, And anyone who falls into these shifting sands must remember not to try to escape with frantic movements, which will only sink him in farther. Just try to float on your back, totally relaxed, until we rescue you. The professor said in agreement, These sands are exactly like water. Whoever tries to stand in it sinks, and whoever lies on his back will stay afloat, like a swimmer. Well, that's comforting, I said, because I can't swim. My sentence spread an atmosphere of gloom over us, and no one responded. Slowly and carefully we started moving over the sands. If we didn't have the compass with us, I would have insisted we were going in pointless circles. I could swear I had seen this group of cacti 20 times since we left the plane. And suddenly we noticed the scene for the first time. It was a plane, an old single-engine plane. Part of the wreckage stood nearly vertically, half buried in the sand with one wing totally broken and its fuselage rusty, burnt steel. It was a fighter plane which crashed with its miserable pilot dozens of years ago, and we had found it. It's Italian, the professor shouted as he ran to check it out. He circled the plane, touching the worn metal with true nostalgia. It must have crashed here 40 years ago. This is a typical plane from that era. Amazing. Annoyance showing on his face, Mahmoud hissed, Of course that butcher crashed, either before or after a raid on innocent citizens of my hometown, Fazan. He got what he deserved. The professor paled, and it seemed to us like he was about to explode. Young man, he grumbled, this man was a miserable soldier who was only following orders. I myself fought the Libyans because the Duchy ordered me to. Your soldiers slaughtered our children, and I can't accept that Mussolini called his generals to his office, ordering them to slaughter children. They did so because they wanted to do it, and after the war you would hear them say innocently, Don't blame me, I'm a soldier. I was following orders. The professor did not answer, but started circling the plane again in fascination. From between his teeth, he hummed a triumphant-sounding Italian melody, clearly some kind of anthem the fascists used to sing during the war, all about the glory of Rome and all that nonsense. He then lifted his hand skyward, shouting some unknown words. This man is totally psycho, maybe more than we suspected, and the scary thing was that we were in the same boat with him. This trip would not pass peacefully. I knew and felt that, and awaited it with dread. The night crawled onwards. 3 hours later, here we are sitting, exchanging looks around a campfire that Ahmed lit. Our shadows stretch out behind us on the sands. No sound here except for the cracking of the wood and our breathing. And in each of our hands is a piece of beef jerky which we chew with difficulty. The enigmatic desert night throws its heaviness on the sands and on our souls. The professor stirs the tongues of flames with a stick, and Ahmed's head droops onto his chest. And I am drowning in my black notions when... Did you hear that? A long, sad howling echoes through the desert, answered by scores of similar howls. My worst nightmare has come true. It's the wolves. It seemed that none of my companions heard what I heard. None of them changed their sitting or their facial expressions except for Ahmed, who reached for his gun, attempting to release the safety, and then sighed and lifted his head. The minutes passed slowly, and it must have been almost midnight when we saw the first of the wolves. By the light of the flames, its eyes shone like hailstones as it repeatedly paced around us with curiosity. It must have been the pack leader trying to figure out what was up. The professor picked up a piece of burning wood and threw it in the unwanted visitor's direction, but missed. The wolf simply backed off a few meters. Then Mahmoud aimed at a point behind me. There were others. I jumped like someone stung to find 6 or 8 of those fiery eyes standing about 10 meters away. But Mahmoud's voice rang out, shouting, "Don't run! Stay as you are. Quick movements provoke them, and they never attack a person in a group." I know that, but do they know it too? It was obvious that the wolves had never heard this piece of information, for one of them drew close to me slowly, the smell of its rotten breath filling my nose. It then tilted its head, its hellish gray eyes staring fixed on me. It caught the sleeve of my shirt and started pulling. At first I stayed still so as not to provoke it, but then I changed my mind. I tried in vain to free my sleeve from the iron trap of its jaws. Its growling grew stronger, and here I realized I was in real trouble. The wolf was pulling me outside the circle of fire. 5. The Tawarik. "Mahmoud, do something." "Whoosh! Whoosh! Get out of here, you son of a devil! Leave him!" With my sleeve still in the beast's mouth, I had not changed my seated position. I tried desperately not to lose my balance. This scene reminded me of a police dog when it alerts on the accused and pulls him out of the lineup of suspects. From about a meter away, Ahmed slowly and confidently lifted his rifle and aimed at the wolf. He pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed across the desert. And when the smoke and smell of gunpowder dispersed, the corpse of a huge wolf lay in the sand, blood dripping from its forehead as I still sat nearby, dumbfounded. Like the gunshot signaling the start of a race, the sound caused 10 or more wolves to come running towards us. One of them jumped on Mahmoud and dropped him, going for his throat. And one wolf stood on its back legs, sinking his fangs into the professor's chest. And, just my luck, another crazed, rangy wolf howled and blocked my escape, the hair on its neck standing up like needles. As if I needed this. I landed a strong kick on its chin, which made it yelp in pain and run away, tail between its legs. Meanwhile, 2 strong fangs sank into the meat of Ahmed's wrist. The situation was dire, and it was apparent that these wolves were hungry and desperate. Being the only free one among us, I rushed over to my bag, grabbed my gun, and turned to find 2 more wolves rushing towards me. I held my breath and took aim, but just then I noticed 2 wolves writhing in pain on the sand. Taking a kneeling position, I pulled the trigger again and again. The smell of gunpowder, and hairy bodies scattered about, and the echoing of my shots. I felt Mahmoud's fingers digging into my arm. Enough! Enough! But I continued to fire madly. Rifat! Enough! They ran off after you killed 6 of them. Huh? Finally, my muscles started to relax, and I heard Mahmoud laughing, exclaiming, 5 wolves with 6 bullets. Will you admit now that every human can become a killer when necessary? I shook my head in disgust, throwing my gun to the ground. I despised this weapon, but the violent devil had moved within me for those few seconds, and it was enough. One of you may say I was forced, but no, 2 or 3 bullets would have sufficed. But 6 shots is entirely uncalled for. I never thought it would happen, but I had become bloodthirsty. We had survived the attack, and no one can deny it was all thanks to me. We returned to the campfire exhausted, while the pilot piled up the bodies of the 6 wolves a short distance away. Gloomily, we started reloading our guns in preparation for another attack by these fervent beasts. After 15 minutes, we heard a sound. A human voice called out, so we all stood, keen to see what was happening. In the darkness, we could just make out some huge monsters approaching us, monsters with big, rounded backs and long necks. But as they drew closer, we discovered they were camels, each one ridden by a strong man with a scarf covering his face. They drew close to the fire, forming a circle around it. "Assalamu alaikum," one of the men greeted us in beautiful Arabic, so we returned his greeting with an even better one. I whispered to Mahmoud, "Tawarik?" "No," he replied. "Actually, they're taboo. They're very much like the Tawarik." "Well, what's the difference?" The name." Carrying their rifles, the men surrounded us, mysterious, enigmatic. Still on top of his camel, their leader spoke to Ahmed. We heard gunshots, so we came quickly. We realized the wolves had attacked someone, and your fire led us here. The professor needed no translation to discern the topic of this conversation, for the situation was clear and obvious. We were lucky. We had survived for 12 hours after the plane crash, and now we were saved from the hunger and thirst, thank God. Ahmed relayed the story to the men, 2 of whom sat their camels on the sand and came over to listen to this talk. I regarded them closely. Their faces were wrapped with blue bandanas, and they all had dark complexions, though one of them had blue eyes. Strong features, stern, full of masculinity, at least what showed from behind their face covers. Each one held a daunting, double-edged sword, a dagger, and an old rifle engraved with lovely Arabic script. Trying to follow the Arabic conversation, the professor shouted eagerly, "What are you talking about? I don't understand." I turned to him and quickly translated to sum up the conversation. I told him they wanted to know where we were heading. Surprised, he remarked, "What kind of question is that? The Tassili Plateau, of course." The 2 men overheard the word Tassili amidst the English words, and their eyes met in a meaningful look. But what meaning? For tense moments, silence prevailed, and then one of the men asked me, "Will you join us? Our camp is nearby, and we have 4 camels without a rider." "Of course." And in silence, we put out the fire, picked up our supplies, and approached the 4 camels sitting on the sand. "Oh my gosh, how can you ride these dinosaurs?" One of the taboo helped me up onto the back of a camel, then gave it an order and patted its nose. I felt like I was on a swing hanging from one rope, front, back, front. My screams filled the desert, but this dinosaur stood up and I started to feel more stable, as if overlooking the desert from a high balcony. The men were still laughing sarcastically when our convoy started moving. And now I understood why they call camels the ships of the desert, because the rider will definitely get seasick. That I am sure of. We sat in the men's camp, drinking camel milk and eating dates. Daylight revealed the cruel sun and fiery sands, but the situation was different this time. With interest, I checked out the camp in greater detail. The sheepskin tents slung together roughly, and here and there, one of their women tending to her dull chores. And I was surprised at the women showing their faces while the men only removed their face coverings to eat and drink. Their faces were pretty, a rough sort of beauty, desert beauty, and I also noticed more blue eyes than expected. As for the strange yellow coloring of their faces, it was from an ointment made of ground copper to keep away the flies. On their hands and feet I saw designs drawn with henna, a custom commonly followed by the married women. They moved about freely and sat with us openly, without any shyness. The unmarried girls, however, were nowhere to be seen. I was sunk in contemplation of such things when I felt the professor's hand tugging at my wrist, compelling me to participate in the conversation. Mahmoud was explaining what the Italian scientist wanted from these taboo. "We want you to participate in this trip and lead us to the Tassili caves. We'll pay you well." The men exchanged looks, the meaning of which I did not understand. I later learned that the strongest among them, physically and in character, was the leader of the tribe. His name was Karim, and he was saying, "Mister, the Tawarik don't speak much, so make your offer." Mahmoud translated for the professor, who rifled through his pockets and brought out something golden and shiny, a fairly large brick of gold. In a victorious tone, he said simply, "This, and you'll get another one like it when we return from the caves." Karim picked up the brick, weighing it in his experienced hands. Interest showed on his face, and he said, "And why would you pay us in gold?" "Because I think you don't deal in paper money." I leaned close to Mahmoud's ear and whispered, "He's had that with him this whole time?" "Well, obviously, he planned for everything. He guessed he would need aid from the Tawarik at some point on this trip, and he was right." "But why would he tell them he has another brick?" I asked. "They could just kill us at any second and take it." Mahmoud smoothed his messy hair and said confidently, "Not the taboo. These people take honor very seriously. They're very strong-willed, and nothing can corrupt them. Plus, we're at their mercy anyway." Putting the gold brick into his pocket, Karim remarked, "Since you are so keen on reaching the plateau, I will introduce you to a desert scout the likes of which you'll never find. It's the will of destiny." And he aimed at one of the silent men sitting next to them, demanding, "Speak, Gabriel." Just then, with a dramatic movement like someone waving a magic wand, the professor threw down his cup of milk. His face shone with enthusiasm. He jumped up like someone stung. "Gabriel!" he cried. "Gabrine! It's you? You?" He touched the face of the man, who showed no sign of interest. "You were the scout for Henry Lott, the scout who led him to the Tassili caves 10 years ago. It's really you?" Gabriel calmly replaced his face covering and murmured, "My mission with Mr. Lott was very difficult." 6. The Caves. The call to prayer rang out, so we stood in prayer there on the sand, still wet with dew, while the professor checked his papers and maps. He had become very excited to learn that Gabriel, or Gabrine, the guide for Henry Lott on his famous trip, would be his guide as well. Gabrine is the distorted European pronunciation for the name Gabriel, and also a play on Gabarine, the Berber word for mountains. Having finished the prayer with the taboo men, I went and sat heavily next to the professor on the sands. Swallowing hard, I asked him, "Professor, if someone had already done this trip and left nothing big or small unstudied, what do you expect us to add to their findings?" Without looking at me, as he couldn't stand the sight of me ever since the plane crash, the man replied, "I'm looking for the cave they didn't enter, for the stone unturned." And in front of me he opened one of the maps and, with his pen, pointed out a group of simple cave drawings encircled in red ink. This small, insignificant cave, for instance, they neglected to check as they were astonished and busy recording what they saw in the bigger caves. In addition, its entrance is blocked by fallen rocks. "And is this the cave of interest?" I asked. "Well, it's one of them." As we went to mount our camels, dawn was spreading its reddish garment over the desert, its pure, cool breeze tickling our faces. And, as usual, here I am getting thrown to the front, back, front, and finally... But the camel was in a foul mood, very agitated, and I felt that any moment it would toss me from its back. To my surprise, I noticed one of the taboo men lighting a hand-rolled cigarette and sticking it in the camel's nose. Even stranger, the camel started inhaling the smoke eagerly and began to calm down. Mahmoud explained, "These camels are addicted to smoking. They need at least one cigarette every day. Every competent camel handler knows this." The strangeness of this world never ceases to amaze me, and it seems like I will continue to experience this, always surprised, until the second I close my eyes for the last time. On the other hand, I don't like those who corrupt the pure spirit and instincts of God's mute creatures as a joke, like the dog who laps up whiskey, and the chimpanzee who smokes cigars, and the camel who enjoys tobacco. But this was not time to join the ranks of PETA. Rather, the time had come to begin our journey into the unknown. It's the truth, the priceless truth which will give science immeasurable flexibility. The truth. When Paolo Giraldi wants something, he gets it, and others can only show their reluctance. If you don't see wolves, you would feel there's some kind of trick. Ahmed, where are you going? What a madman. You'll fall into one of these pits and break your face. The plateau lay reclining in front of us. The taboo men pointed it out, exchanging words in their accent I couldn't get. Meanwhile, on his camel, Gibrin circled the area slowly, the sound of the camels being sat down, the men talking, a scorpion scampering away from our feet, seeking a calmer place. Because of the snakes, their venom is fatal, Mahmoud commented while regarding his feet. And actually, his warning was very much called for, as this place truly was dangerous. If you look around carefully, you'll realize there's something under every rock. A relaxed snake regarding you lazily, or a scorpion, or a heinous-looking lizard, or something unknown but alive. This desert is a real nightmare, a melody of drought, harshness, and cruelty. And every living thing within it is dry, rough, and cruel, even these polite, taboo men. We had reached a group of rocky caves sculpted by nature into the base of the plateau. Gabriel inspected it with an expert eye and casual disinterest, like a boring old friend. As for the professor, I was beginning to worry about his mental state. He screamed and danced about, speaking to us all in Italian which only Mahmoud understood. He was beyond amazed, especially upon seeing inscriptions carved at the entrance of the caves, inscriptions drawn by those who preceded us, Henry Lott's men, and Brennan, the traveler. The professor prepared to enter the first cave, but Gabriel, competent and sure, stopped him firmly and then took up a rock and threw it an arm's length into the entrance. We heard the sound of something moving, and then silence. "He's cautious," said Mahmoud. "He wants to chase any snakes away, and he's right, for sure." Just then, one or two torches appeared, and very slowly we moved forward into the entrance of the cave. Our shadows preceded and followed us. Dank and rotten smells attacked our noses. A terrible walk by spots of light dancing on the cave walls. If any ghost lived in this place, it would die of fright upon seeing us. "I can't see anything. Where are the cave drawings?" Lifting his flashlight, the professor replied, "They're everywhere. Don't you see them?" 200 centuries ago, there was a civilization whose people already knew how to draw. The professor moaned like someone thrashing in hell. Sweat covered his forehead and his whole body trembled. And by the light of the torches, we saw a depiction of the weirdest saga ever drawn by a human. Do you see, as I do, the flying, conjoined men? Men running towards mysterious cylindrical bodies, and men wearing shiny helmets and white robes. Stout blonde women flying as small black humans stare at them in surprise. And this, a head with 2 antennae. The light danced over the drawings, which appeared to move. Actually, they are moving. And look here. Up a bit. Higher. A little to the right. Yes, here it is. Some kind of men with flippers as feet. Don't you see it? Someone with a fevered imagination had stood here 200 centuries ago, pouring all of his mad secrets into these stone walls. What genius, at the dawn of history, decided to abandon the spear for drawing? And for what purpose? These drawings are incredibly gorgeous, but in my opinion, they do not hold the secrets of the universe any more than a wildly imaginative child scribbling in the margins of his notebook. Trying not to spoil the atmosphere of foreboding, Mahmoud whispered in my ear, "What do you think?" Making sure the professor would not hear my disinterested tone, I replied, "Genius." I'm not talking about the quality of the drawings. I'm talking about their meaning. "You want a meaning for something meaningless?" I retorted. "This whole thing represents nothing more than a caveman who knows how to draw." "You still insist?" "Of course." At that moment, the professor brought out his flash camera and began taking scores of photos of these wall drawings. Around 5,000 small drawings he tried to capture in 2 or 3 rolls of film. And, quite deviously, I noticed he had forgotten to remove the cap from the lens, which really cheered me up in a brutal sort of way. I would not draw his attention to that, especially as he had finished 3 rolls of film before I noticed. But after some minutes I felt my conscience pricking me, and so pointed at the lens politely. He swore in Italian and started refilling the camera with new film and capturing the scenes once again. After an hour of this, the boredom was killing me. I glanced at the taboo men and found them standing as silent as the rocks, disinterest showing on their faces. For them, the situation was nothing more than a routine job they had performed many times before, and like me, they saw nothing amazing about these drawings except that they brought crazy scientists paying the highest price. And now, we leave that boring cave only to enter another one, and leave this boring cave for another, even more boring one. I can't take this anymore. These repetitive scenes bleed together in my mind. They're all the same, and none of it interests me. Yet the professor grows ever more crazed, and the taboo men more and more disinterested. Ahmed seems worn out. And finally we finish with most of them and reach the small cave no one had entered before, the cave with its entrance blocked by 2 boulders. The professor led the way, inspecting the 2 boulders. He looked at the men questioningly, as if asking for their help. "No," Karim said this firmly, leaving no space for any more insistence or requests. A strong reason prevented them from leaving us, or assisting us in moving these rocks. "But this is the cave," the professor pleaded. "No." "But I paid you to—" "No," Karim said again as he stepped back, announcing the end of the day's exploration, and we could only follow him, swallowing our questions. The night had fallen, and visibility had decreased. All of existence seemed to be covered in a mysterious blue as we sat by the fire, eating bread and dates and drinking skim milk. I had taken off my shoes, and my toes spasmed painfully as if the blood inside would tear them apart. The swelling grew worse. The professor, on the other hand, kept his shoes on and did not eat, but his blue eyes shone by the light of the flame, driven by a crazy idea which cornered him. Someone brought out a strange, stringed instrument, like some kind of violin with only 1 string. One of the men started playing it. I whispered in Mahmoud's ear, "Even these men play music?" "Sure, why not? They are human, right? I mean, in all your travels, have you ever met any people who don't play and sing when they gather around a fire at night?" "And this instrument?" I asked. "It's very similar to one played in the Egyptian countryside." "It's called Al-Amzad, and you will hear wonders from it." And truly, the man sang with a lovely voice in an unfamiliar accent. It was a sad song which surely spoke of solitude, lost love, and a cruel girl once loved. It spoke of the desert and about the family home, or about anything sad which speaks to your heart but for which you lack courage to mention even to yourself. And 2 tears fell on my cheeks as I listened to this song played on a makeshift violin in this desert. And between my tears, I felt the professor leaning against me, ruining everything. "The 2 rocks," he said. "Which rocks?" "The 2 rocks at the cave's entrance. They weren't caused by an avalanche. They were placed there by someone intentionally, to block the entrance." "And why would someone do that?" "There's something they don't want us to see," he insisted, "or something they want to keep inside. So we must know what that thing is." His face constricted with insistence. "We have to enter that cave. Tonight." "7. The Unentered Cave." When the men slept, I covered myself with the woolen blanket they provided and curled up next to the fire. The cruel desert cold pierced like a dagger. It must have been 1 a.m. when I felt the professor shaking me roughly, and by the light of the 3/4 moon, I noticed his anxious expression. I almost spoke, but he covered my mouth with his hand, whispering, "Shh! I'm going with Mahmoud and Ahmed to see the cave. Do you want to come with us?" "We won't force you." With sleep still weighing down my eyelids, I whispered back, "Why not wait until the morning?" "Because the men will prevent us." In a matter of moments, I reevaluated the situation. There will be 3 of us, actually 4. And it'll only take a few minutes because the cave is nearby, and like the rest of the caves, it's shallow. So why not go? At least I'll satisfy my curiosity and dispel the reputation for cowardice with which the Italian had labeled me. Plus, there is a guilty pleasure in discovering hidden places, a deep-rooted pleasure within the human psyche since the dawn of human history. Do you remember the story of Bluebeard, the one who gifted his wife a mansion of 99 rooms for her to move around in as she pleases? He did, however, forbid her from entering the 100th room. Thus, she became obsessed with entering the 100th room, and despite his warning, she entered it. And what did she find? And what did she see? It's the human fascination with the unknown, a fascination never satiated. So, like you expect, I stuck my feet, still swollen from sleep, in my shoes, and rose lightly to go with them to the final cave. In front of the cave we stood. The entrance was blocked by the 2 rocks, above which we saw some kind of inscription in a foreign script. By the light of the flashlight, we inspected it with curiosity. Breathing hard with excitement, the professor pronounced, "It's the Tawaric alphabet. Its letters derived from the Cartesian language." "Okay, and what does it mean?" "I don't know," he answered, "but it's a warning for anyone who enters, of course." He then gestured for us to help move one of the rocks, and the 4 of us joined forces in this effort. More effort. Our bottom lips bled from the force of our teeth, our backs strained, and our veins nearly exploded. I felt the leaking of the capillaries in my eyes. My biceps strained, and heave ho, heave ho. The rock had budged. "Don't give up, guys. Come on, Ahmed. You act like you're trying, but you're shifting the weight towards me." Heave ho. "This is impossible. We'll never make it. I'll get a slipped disc. We've done it. Finally." At last, the rock tilted to one side, making enough room for us to climb over and enter the cave. "Well then, let's go." "Just a second," said Mahmoud as he tossed a rock into the cave. He had remembered to be cautious. We waited for a minute and then climbed past the rock into the cave. We had to turn on our flashlights against the pitch darkness. A rotten stench filled the place. Stalactites dangled from the roof of the cave, like a mythical monster's fangs closing down on us. I tried to push away such a notion from my imagination. The walls were formed of regular rock devoid of drawings, just boring rocks in a narrow, smelly cave. And, of course, the professor was terribly disappointed. His face revealed his sulking, as if he had expected to find the secret of life in a golden box inside this cave. Our flashlights moved slowly over the walls, looking for anything, but with no luck. The ancient artist had forgotten to make his mark on this cave, or maybe he grew bored of the whole thing. Suddenly, Mahmoud spoke nervously. "Shh! Did you hear that?" He froze for a few seconds before his muscles relaxed, and he whispered, "Nothing." We continued our tour through the darkness. Strange. I could swear I heard a strange sound as well, but I'm aware that shared delusion is a real thing, and anticipation can be very powerful. "Look!" the professor shouted eagerly, pointing at something in one of the corners. We rushed over to him as he aimed at the ground with a shaky finger. A hole, and by the shaky light of our flashlights we could discern a well-crafted staircase leading downward. And without another word, the professor tested the steps gingerly with his foot and descended into the hole while moving his flashlight up and down. From the opening, I peered down and yelled in a shaky voice, Professor, what are you doing?" Annoyed, he shouted back, "What kind of question is that?" "This is not the time," I shouted. "We don't have ropes or weapons or—" But he did not answer and continued his descent. A disaster was imminent. Yes, I'm sure of it. Just then Ahmed yelled in terror, "He's been charmed! I'm sure of it! Something is calling him!" The hair on my head stood up from the gravity of this idea, and I gave him a spiteful look, as this was no time for such clever imaginings. Mahmoud, however, seemed to be thinking. His forehead creased as he whispered while kneeling at the edge of the hole, "You know what I think? Where do these stairs lead? And who made them?" "I have no idea." He smiled cunningly, a devilish look shining in his eyes. What? Is he kidding? This is crazy. Mahmoud, don't tell me you think. I don't think, I'm sure, he replied. I swallowed nervously. The idea was horrible, but realistic. Do these stairs, built by a human, lead to the underworld? Do these stairs descend to Atlantis? With a cracked voice, I told him, but there's no proof. He smoothed his hair and again smiled deviously, saying, there's more than one proof. The strange drawings any primitive caveman could draw. The rocks blocking the entrance. The taboo men's fear and the legends their family must have told them about people living under the ground. That's why they blocked the only entrance and exit to this world. And gradually, the entrance of this cave became an almost religious taboo. And that's why they did not allow Brennan or Lot to enter, I murmured. Exactly, said Mahmoud. I stood from my kneeling position, dusting the dirt from my knees, and said as I lit a cigarette, we have to keep the professor from going down. We should stay with him. I mean, God only knows what's down there. Mahmoud started preparing to go down, asking, do you have your gun? Yeah? Okay, that's good, as we are unarmed. Should we go? He started down the stairs, followed by me and then Ahmed. But shouldn't we leave someone standing guard in the cave chamber while we go down? I don't know. I really don't know. But don't blame us, for we had no idea what awaited us on this blasted excursion. We had no idea. We had only descended about 100 steps when the scream rang out, a terrible scream of fright from below. And we were surprised by the professor rushing up the stairs, disregarding us. Not seeing in front of him, he bumped into me and crashed into Ahmed, and then he too fell landing on one of the stairs and howling like a teenaged girl, his face constricted. He spoke in rapid-fire Italian while Mahmoud stood nearby listening, his face paling. With much worry and dread, I implored him, Mahmoud, what is he saying? He did not answer, but went on listening with interest. Mahmoud, by God, speak. I said this while lighting another cigarette. A cough crept upwards from my chest as Mahmoud answered, his eyes fixed on the professor. He's scared. Oh, thanks for that, genius, I quipped. I got that without any translation. And he's saying, Mahmoud went on, that the thing is coming. He's telling us to run. And what exactly is the thing? I didn't catch it, said Mahmoud. He's in a bad state, and he's speaking incoherently. He then checked his watch by his flashlight and mumbled, Anyway, it's almost dawn, and we'd better get back before the men wake up for the prayer and learn of our little mission here. Taking the professor's hand and helping him up, Ahmed commented, Plus, he's in no shape to go any farther. And so, maybe out of good luck and as a mercy on my nerves, we returned to the main chamber and exited the cave. As best we could, we moved the rock back to roughly where it was before, though the opening was still visible. The moonlight spread over the sands as we returned to the camp, trying to prevent the professor from screaming hysterically. But lucky for us, the taboo men were still sleeping. Those guys really have clear consciences. Taking off our shoes, we lay on the sand and made loud snoring noises, although after 10 minutes there was no need to pretend as we tasted beautiful sleep for real. At 4 a.m. I felt a hand shaking me, trying to wake me to catch the dawn prayer. And by the light of the rising sun, I was surprised to see the terrible state the professor was in. 8. The Mysterious Calling. Throughout the day, the professor spoke incoherently, shouting threatening words in Italian, trying to scare something. What did this man see? And what is this, the thing? His nerves are really broken, but I could find no clear medical reason for it, and I could not assist him. I could only force-feed him food and water along with some sedatives, while increasing my usage of cigarettes astronomically. I didn't like it, but I was nervous, so nervous. The taboo sat gloomily in a circle, regarding us with their sharp, unblinking eyes. These people are strong and honest, but I swear they have no empathy or concern for us at all. I have to get away from all of this. I never want to see sands again, nor taboo, nor crazy college professors. But there's no way around it. The train to Cairo, unfortunately, does not pass anywhere near the Tassili Plateau. Along with 2 of his men, Karim came and stood in front of me for a moment. He then sat cross-legged on the sand, looking at me quickly. I smiled in embarrassment. "Cigarette?" I asked in a friendly way while offering him the pack. He continued staring at me with his penetrating, sharp eyes. Very annoying, really. I don't remember if I knew at that time of Sartre's saying, "Hell is other people," but that's exactly how I felt. I heard Karim asking calmly, "Did you enter that cave last night?" "I said," he repeated, "did you enter the cave last night?" What do I say? Should I lie? He certainly had something making him doubt us, and what did we miss in our escape at dawn today? Our footprints, or the rock out of place, or... Then it's wise not to assume these people are idiots. Yes, we went in. Silence prevailed for a few seconds, and a fateful surrender showed in the men's eyes. Then, while taking the cigarette from me and bringing down the cover from his mouth, Karim said, "We knew it," and he gestured for me to follow them. We walked silently over the rocks to the cave we had escaped at dawn, and there at the entrance we looked at the ground. No doubt about it, our footprints showed clearly. But stranger and more worrisome still were the other footprints, much bigger and deeper than ours. They were footprints of clawed feet, greedily penetrating the earth. They tracked off for a distance before dissolving into the sands, and so were impossible to follow. Lifting my eyes in questioning, I saw the looks in the eyes of the men and felt goosebumps run up my spine. With some annoyance, Karim asked, "And what do you say now?" "About what?" He blew out smoke and then sat cross-legged on a rock, resting his rifle on his knees, saying, "The Assas has awoken." "The Assas?" "Yes," said Karim. "The cave guard whom no creature has disturbed for 200 centuries. Our fathers and grandfathers warned us about it. And beware to he who dares. Yet here you've dared." He spoke without anger, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that his manner gave away some kindness, as if what would happen to us was enough with no need for extra misery. Curious, I asked, "And where did this Assas come from?" He pointed downwards, meaning from under the earth, so I asked, "Who lived down there?" He shook his head and went on smoking, so I asked, "So you don't know? No one knows. You only see the drawings on the cave walls, right?" Snuffing out his cigarette, he threw it afar and simply nodded in the affirmative. He then picked up his rifle and stood wearily. But before leaving, he did not neglect to tell us, "You're going to die, and us along with you, possibly. That is what our ancestors said." I have to light the fuse, but where is my lighter? No wolf breaks its victim's neck and twists it in the opposite direction. And beware to he who dares. Yet here you've dared. The sun was sinking in the west before the professor's status started to improve. Mahmoud sat cross-legged next to him, dabbing his forehead intermittently for no apparent reason, as he had no fever but for his fevered desire to do something. The professor lifted his head and then sat up cross-legged. Kneeling next to him, I congratulated him on his survival, but his reaction surprised me. He threw a cruel look at me, turning to ask Mahmoud, "What is that madman saying?" What? Had the professor lost his memory? Surely not, as he was not of the type with clear conscience, nor one who forgets. I asked him discreetly, "Professor, at dawn you had a terrible experience, right?" His anger flared, and he shouted at Mahmoud, saliva spraying from his mouth, "Aren't you going to keep this idiot away from me?" We did our best to calm him down and then began interrogating him calmly. He actually remembered everything. his descending into the pit, all that he had done, but he could not remember that something specific aroused his fear. "Maybe it's claustrophobia, or of being underground," the professor suggested, trying to find a logical explanation for his panic at dawn today. "Yes, that must be it. It played with my mind and paralyzed my thinking." I exchanged doubtful looks with Mahmoud. The fear of being underground does not come on suddenly, and does not cause a state of continuous hallucinations lasting a whole day, not to mention that those given to such fear don't usually speak of the thing they have seen. They are actually acutely aware that their fear has no basis. And as for the state of selective amnesia in which a patient forgets something specific but nothing else, he is either honest or a liar. But what was he lying about? Was he lying about seeing the thing, or lying about not seeing it? Or lying about both? This crazy professor never ceased to amaze me and frustrate me. And now, night crawls along the bleak desert sands, poking its nose into our story. Once again, the taboo men light the fire and sit around it, but this time without singing, without conversing, just gloominess and silence. Having explained the danger to all involved, Karim said in a foreboding voice, "We have to leave tomorrow." Having regained his usual annoying nature, the professor protested, "But we haven't finished yet, and—" "We leave tomorrow," Karim said again as he stoked the fire with the tip of his dagger. "And as for tonight, someone has to stand guard. We'll organize shifts for that purpose. No one knows what could happen, so I advise you all to be very careful." He then aimed at me, suggesting I would be the first, then Ahmed, and after that one of the taboo men, then Mahmoud, then one of them. At first I couldn't understand the wisdom in organizing the shifts like this, but I later realized that they had chosen the most prone to boredom, me, I'm not ashamed to say, to take the easy first hours of the night. Then came the role of the strongest among them. It seemed to me that this system was a mistake. My 3-hour shift passed peacefully, except for my black notions which moved across the desert sands, notions which I think contributed to my white hair. But one happy notion occurred to me, dispelling my tension. I imagined my late mom being able to see me now. Think of it, a mother imagining her son standing guard next to a campfire in South Libya, guarding a caravan of Tawarik against a legendary monster. She could never conjure it, even if her imagination were as wide as the ocean itself. I'm a very weird person. Very weird. My shift had ended, so I woke Ahmed to stand guard, and I curled up next to the fire like a big cat, awaiting the happy moment when sleep would knock at my door and place its magical cape over me. But such a wanted guest did not come. With half-open eyes, I looked over at Ahmed as he sat next to the fire, absent-minded, his eyes looking out into the unknown. His eyes were wondrous, the fire casting its shadows over his features. At the time, I had no idea. How could I? What kind of magnetic effect had pierced his soul destructively? He was absent from this world, deep within the non-existent sea waves, and the waves rose higher and higher. For a whole hour I would intermittently pass out and then wake up to find him still sitting in the same position, absent-minded. I began sensing that something was wrong. Putting my glasses on, I thought, this guy hasn't changed positions for a whole hour. And the look, his frozen look, is very suspicious. I'd better get up and see what's wrong with him. But wait, he himself is getting up. Slowly he rose to his feet and walked away from the fire, outside the circle of light. Where is he going? Maybe to urinate? But no. I better follow him and call out to him. But no. His fixed gait and frozen face suggest to me that he is sleepwalking, and it's dangerous to try to wake him. I'll leave it to happen naturally. He moved in an abnormally smooth way in the dark. As for me, I tripped and stumbled, cursed quietly, and hurried along behind him. Ahmed, where are you going, you fool? What a madman. You'll fall into one of these pits and break your face. Short of breath, I grumbled from between my teeth as he advanced far from the distant light of the fire as I followed behind. and the desert stretched out endlessly before us. Just then, I heard the wolf howling in the distance, deep, bleak, full of impending doom. A lone wolf. And I stopped. I had to be smart. I would go back and wake up the men who would help me look for the crazy guy before the wolves shredded him. I could not help him if the wolves mangled me along with him. So I ran back to the camp and roused Mahmoud and Karim. In confused sentences, I told them what was happening. My tension and breathlessness proved clearly the gravity of what I had seen. They rose in a hurry, and some of the other men woke from the commotion. And by the light of our torches, we tracked the clear footprints in the sand and called out, "Ahmed! Ahmed!" only to be answered by hundreds of ghostly echoes. Then suddenly the footprints disappeared. They vanished in a chaotic pattern of uprooted cacti and additional footprints. Nearby, we observed a dark, bottomless pit. Trying not to add to our fear, Karim said calmly, "I think it's clear what has happened." And he looked away from our fearful eyes and continued, "In the morning, we'll descend into this pit to search for him." But we knew it was over, and nothing more could be said. 9. 3. As we reached the camp, we saw the professor returning from afar. As soon as he saw us, he shouted anxiously, "Did you find him?" But our gloomy faces gave him our wordless answer. Surprised, Mahmoud demanded, "Where did you go?" "I went looking for him in the other direction," said the professor. "Maybe he got by us without us noticing." "But you were asleep when we got up to look for him." "Old people never sleep deeply, son," the professor said. "We never sleep easy." And so, we return to chapter 1 of this story, where it all began. You will fall into the same trap which I myself fell into, pulling you downwards in the midst of the desert, no shelter and no escape. Do you remember what happened? Searching for Ahmed, finding his torn jacket and the clawed footprints in the sand, and the men realizing it could mean only one thing: the Assas had moved. Then searching for and finding his corpse, his death not explained by the wolves, and the argument between the Tawarik and the professor, and my insistence on leaving, and then changing my mind, then the feeling of foreboding, and the fire extinguishing, and the sounds of the terrible screams, and... Do you remember all that? Well then, come, let's continue the events of this nightmarish story. I felt it, as did the camel beneath me. Looking around, I found nothing. By the cold light of the moon, I could make out no danger, but it was there. It was inside me. I knew it was following me and drawing closer, but I found no trace around me. Is it invisible? No, and it's not an illusion. It's real. It's real, but beyond my ability to sense. I dug my heels into the back of the camel, spurring it on. Hurry! Hurry! But the animal needed no prompting, as it knew the danger and understood it, and feared it, maybe more than I. It ran over the sands, rushing, rushing. But suddenly, the animal tensed up and stopped, and by the pale moonlight I saw someone standing in front of me, blocking the way. It was Mahmoud. I knew him by his frizzy hair before even seeing his face. He was trembling, his face showing signs of terror. He stood breathless. "Mahmoud, what happened?" "Why did you return, you idiot?" I couldn't bear it," I answered. "But, can you make my camel sit?" "Okay, well, do so. I want to feel my feet on solid ground." He quickly helped me dismount, and as the camel took a sitting position, Mahmoud began trembling and repeating, "He's crazy. That professor is crazy." "What else is new?" I quipped as I lit up a cigarette and listened intently to his story. He told me that when we left, the professor went quite mad and stomped out the fire tensely. He kicked and scattered the supplies and then ran off into the desert, screaming as if being pulled by his tongue. "So that explains the screams and the fire going out." "Yes," Mahmoud explained, "and I ran after him, faster than I've ever run in my life. But he disappeared into the desert as if possessed by a demon. I really don't get it." I smiled confidently, blowing out smoke and tossing my cigarette. On the contrary, I said, it's quite clear now. What do you mean? Sitting down next to the camel, I petted his rough skin and explained, the matter is quite clear. The man has gone completely mad. So now, try to remember all that he said and did throughout this trip. First, he suffered delusions of grandeur, fancying that his theory was an unchangeable destiny. Secondly, I went on, he has fascist tendencies, and surely neither of us can forget what he did when he saw the wreckage of the Italian plane. Thirdly, he's the one who went down the stairs, and he's the one who screamed, hallucinating about the thing, though we saw nothing worrisome. Fourthly, you, and really all of us, noticed that he did not accompany us in searching for Ahmed. So where was he? With some confusion, Mahmoud replied, he was asleep, but woke to our talking and went searching in the other direction. That's what he said, but how is that logical? An old man wakes up at night only to find his companions went in one direction, so why would he go looking in the other direction? I mean, then what? He walks alone in the dark desert, without a weapon, not afraid of the wolves, or something worse. Maybe he was charmed or sleepwalking, like what happened to Ahmed. Well then, how did he sober up? I said, the reality is, I'm pretty sure this man is playing us. He knows of the legend of the assass and is trying to make it real, literally. But why? Mahmoud asked. Sighing wearily, I said, I've met a lot of people of his type, trying carefully to prove legends. A girl trying to revive the story of the werewolf, motivated by revenge. A doctor kidnapping men, turning them into human lab rats. A doctor making a cover story for his smuggling. A killer contributing his crimes to Greek mythology. Lots of reasons, but I think this man is simply crazy. Well then, Mahmoud suggested, he killed Ahmed? I think so, while I was returning to wake you guys up. But how did he mutilate the body? Mahmoud asked. The sheep feels no pain from the shearing after being slaughtered, I answered. He drained his blood somehow, but he made a mistake in twisting the neck in the opposite direction. This method reminds me more of medieval European methods rather than an Arabic legend. A European mind is behind this. Well, where is he now? Plotting another heinous death. For us, of course, I said. So we have to find him immediately. And in spite of the look of protest in Mahmoud's eyes, I rubbed my neck and lit up another cigarette. Honestly, I said, the insinuation was strong, too strong. Even I myself felt the thing as a tangible reality stalking me. I almost died of fear. It made for quite the ominous atmosphere, stirring the imagination. And so we went searching, separately, each one of us carrying a gun. We had lit a fire near the camel so that we could return to our point of origin. In silence, I roamed my area, carrying my gun and led by the moonlight. My eyes were alert, scanning the area desperately. My throat was as dry as a discarded bottle of glue. My only comfort came from my shadow falling in front of me and not behind me. In this way, I would notice this crazy man if he attacked from behind. I remembered everything, his blue eyes, his screaming, his neurosis, and I felt such strong hatred for him. I don't like being fooled. I'm fed up with all these lunatics who find me easy prey to manipulate and convince of the impossible. Rifat! Mahmoud's voice echoed through the silent desert. I startled. Dr. Rifat! The sound is coming from that direction, so let's hurry. And there, in an empty stretch of sand, I found Mahmoud standing, his long, heinous shadow thrown on the sand. He stood with bowed head, and at his feet was something resembling a pile of raggedy clothes. But, though I wished it to be so, it was not that. It was the body of the professor, mangled, his neck twisted backward, eyes bulging. And when I looked at the sand, I saw what I feared. The clawed footprints we now know well. We were wrong, I told Mahmoud bitterly, and with a shaky hand I lit up another cigarette. My lungs felt like stone. I was suffocating. Mahmoud said nothing, so I went on. We discovered the truth, but too late. Mahmoud, say something. His face was covered in darkness, his features mysterious and obscured. For a moment, terror crept into my soul, but finally he spoke. He spoke, but his words only made things worse, as his voice came out throaty, broken, totally meaningless. And then he started laughing wildly. His nerves were broken, and his laughter sounded like a car radiator in the moments before it blows up. This is the problem with others. They're always stronger and more resilient than I am until, suddenly, they break down completely, while I maintain my steadiness until the last moment. The one who starts a race at full speed does not last. Here is Mahmoud laughing, and laughing, his hair flying about his face. He claps his hands together wildly, exclaiming, "The fascist pig is dead! That crazy bastard is dead!" Tossing his gun aside, he clutched his abdomen as he literally bent over in laughter. And here a vague idea invaded my mind. It started out vague, but soon became more clear. And now here it is, as bright as the sun. What if it was Mahmoud who played this trick? The professor was crazy, and you wanted to punish him for the Italians' crimes against your people in Fezzan, and so you concocted a careful plan and pinned the crime on the assassin. You had ample time to kill him and mangle his body when I left you alone in the desert. We went looking for him, so you called me and acted crazy. And maybe you aren't pretending. You really are crazy. And afterwards, there is a new victim for the cave guard, the skinny Egyptian doctor named Rifat Ismail, and the Tawarik find the lone survivor of this massacre and believe only one explanation. The idea was mixed up and tangled, but my imagination would not let it go. I have to get away. I have to. But he'll chase me down, of course, and I won't be able to tie him up or kill him. The only way is to take him with me until I meet up with one of the caravans. And when we reach safety, it will be easy to discover the truth. I'm a soldier. I was following orders. His fit of laughter had ended, and Mahmoud regarded me carefully, and when he saw the strange look in my eyes, he must have understood. Trying to sound fierce, I commanded, "Now, walk in front of me, and don't give me that innocent act, because I'm crazy, and you know what that means." And I aimed my gun between his eyes. 10. 2. Looking at me coldly, Mahmoud said, "I should have known, Rifat. Your hatred of the professor exceeded my expectations. Hatred wasn't a good enough reason to kill." I smiled sarcastically and gripped the handle of my gun nervously, saying, "And what else?" With a sarcastic smile, he replied, "I started doubting you when I noticed your bloodthirsty way of facing those wolves. I said to myself, 'Self, this man is hiding his raging sadism.' And then I noticed your crazy chain smoking. No sane person smokes that much. And not only that," he went on, "you were also the last one to see Ahmed alive, and maybe your going and coming back gave you a lucky chance to be alone with the professor." Trying to look intimidating, I smiled cruelly, saying, "You've got it all wrong. And maybe I'm wrong too, but I can't take any chances. You will be my prisoner until we find the others and learn the truth. And I won't say it again. I am totally crazy." Moments passed tensely as we glared at each other with hostility. The game of suspicion had started, but I had the upper hand, and would not let it go. True, I knew there was a strong possibility that I could be wrong, but what would you do if you were in my shoes? Threaten him? Well, I did exactly that. It's easy to keep a sacred flame of doubt alive in one's heart, even if it takes all night. But your eyelids grow heavy after all this emotional chaos, and your body begins to relax. But you won't sleep. You won't sleep. If I slept, it might be the last time. Spending the night with someone who wants to kill you is not an easy thing, even if you're the one holding the gun. That bastard had curled up on the sand, enjoying a comfortable sleep just to spite me. He had nothing to lose. He was at my mercy and so could sleep in peace. And I remembered bitterly the sarcastic quote by Bernard Shaw, "The most anxious man in a prison is the governor." I won't sleep. I won't. Maggie, my dear angel, what are you doing in Inverness-shire at this moment? And what is Hueda doing? My sister Raifa and my mother, and Tabitha. Azad has the face of a cannibal, but he is talented like Mukhtar. Omar Mukhtar is challenging General Graziani, and Graziani left behind a sign reading, "We did not lack courage, but luck." Chess doesn't depend on luck, but vampires don't exist. Who mentioned vampires? What is going on? I don't remember, but this doctorate thesis has really worn me out. But I won't sleep. I won't. When the Assas comes for my brother Rita, there were no other planets, and I won't sleep. I won't sleep. I won't. The sun is burning me, reflecting millions of crystalline spots of light behind my eyelids. It's noon. I slept. Despite my fight to stay awake, physiology won over my love of life, and now I'm surprised to still be alive. Mahmoud escaped, of course, but I still have my gun. He avoided trying to take it from my hand so as not to awaken me. And, of course, he took back his own gun and camel. I guess he is an honest killer. I mean, he did leave me half of everything, and he could have done otherwise. So either he is falsely accused or is delaying my murder according to his own timing. I know he's nearby and waiting, but where? If I was normal, I would have ridden my camel through the desert looking for a way out. But whoever told you I was normal? Unfortunately, I can't make this damn dinosaur stand up, which means I'm finished. But I'm still not going to panic, as my reality of being lost in the desert hasn't yet sunk in. I know it's true, but I'm not accepting it. And maybe I myself am on the verge of madness. Who knows? Maybe it's for the best. I walked a lot, but found no track to lead me out of this bind. I've been going in continuous circles since leaving the professor that night, unsure of my direction. Thus, I might be currently at the border of Algeria or at the border of Egypt, but I'll never know. And the Tassili Plateau, has it evaporated completely? Every time I return to my dear camel to take some sips of water, my camel roams around, chewing an occasional cactus with his thick lips. I'm really in a bind, and even worse, I'm finally starting to realize it. At last, I found one of the taboo's campsites. Actually, the campsite I spent last night guarding. Wait, last night? No, the night before last. The fire is out, and the remains of the battle the professor waged in his delirium are scattered around. The caves are nearby, but in which direction? I inspected the sands, looking for something I may have forgotten, or really anything which might be useful. And indeed, I found the professor's compass, 2 maps, a pencil, 2 pieces of candy, and 2 sticks of dynamite. Opening the map, I noticed something important. With insight from the taboo men, the professor had drawn red lines marking the paths of their desert convoys, which means their nearest possible location is about 5 kilometers north. A valuable piece of information, maybe worth my life itself. Only problem is, if I reach that path, I'll have to wait God knows how long before one of their convoys pass by. It's not a scheduled train or bus. I may survive today, or maybe a week, or maybe a month, or I may not survive at all. But I can't stay here forever. I have to do something. Anything. Retracing my own footprints in the sand, I went back to my camel. I pulled at its reins, and it actually obeyed me. I led it to the campsite and from there northward. I had no alternative but to walk in front of it instead of riding. We trudged along slowly but steadily. 2 hours had passed, and the dreadful blue color, the color of fear, crawled across the sands. Night would be upon us within the hour, and with it, thousands of terrible possibilities, and it would be a very long night. But suddenly, the camel froze in its tracks. It raised its voice, a deep, long bellow as drool dropped from its mouth. The desert stretched out naked in front of me, swimming in a sea of silver. And in the distance, I saw another camel walking alone, looking for cacti. I know that camel, and its presence here can only mean Mahmoud is nearby and that both of us are walking in the right direction, towards the taboo convoy's path. You had it all wrong, and maybe I did too, but I can't take any chances. On the moonlit sands I found him, and of course he wasn't standing up, nor even amongst the living. He was dead, killed in the same hellish way, and next to him the same familiar clawed footprints, another heinous scene carved into my memory. Once again I realized I had wronged an innocent man, but much too late. The poor man was scared of me, even though I was also in fear of him, and after a while he escaped from me only to catch up with his destiny. And the Assas was there, and the Assas which I now realized was definitely real, the Assas which had existed for centuries, guarding the Tassili caves against anyone who might try to descend and discover what lay beneath. But discover what exactly? I don't know, and I won't know because I'm next on the list. I'm awaiting my turn outside the executioner's door until such time as he finishes with whoever preceded me. And he had finished and was calling for me to enter. The Assas is here, the entity which drowned us in a sea of mutual doubts and accusations, compelling each of us to stray off alone and meet his punishment. Only the Tawarik, with their instinctive wisdom, knew this and avoided the danger. And when they return, they will find only 3 mangled corpses and a new legend to tell their children by the fire at night. Who knows? Maybe I would be lucky and be immortalized in a beautiful, heroic song to be played on the homemade violin for generations to come. What would the lyrics of this song be? It should say, "We have warned the fools, but they believed not a word, and so the guard had the upper hand, and the sands drank their blood," or something like that. I really liked the idea of this song. I started composing a melody for it, snapping my fingers and humming along and dancing in the moonlight. I've gone completely mad. I know that, and I enjoy it. Bavarians call the mentally ill Monzolknish, meaning roughly lunatic. Yes, I've become a lunatic, a lunatic. We have warned the fools, and the sands drank their blood. Tra-la-la-la-la. 11:1. And now comes the moment of truth. No more joking around. I don't have the luxury of hysteria. I have to organize my thoughts. Okay, I know I have 2 sticks of dynamite in my pack, as well as a lighter and my gun. True, it's not enough, but it's a start. I have 2 camels, and since I can't ride either of them, I'll make use of them like a scientist uses a Geiger counter. These animals are very sensitive, unfailing in their instincts. So when the hair on its neck stands up, I'll know something is coming my direction. Something unfriendly, of course. The wolves howled, but I had no time for trivial fears. I would not waste a single bullet on the beasts. But the terrible truth plagued my mind. The wolves howled in the distance, but dared not come closer. Even those beasts know the truth. I'm out of cigarettes. I've survived lung cancer. I was carrying 3 canteens of water, one belonging to the professor, and another to Mahmoud, and my own, may God prolong my life. Drinking from the last canteen, I had a strange thought. Didn't we have more water than this? Oh well, thirst won't be a problem after today. That's weird, Dr. Rifat. You told me you are interested in the secrets of the paranormal. Whoosh! Get out of here, you son of a devil! Leave him. And time dragged on. Hysteria crept slowly through my mind, and I found amusement in imagining myself hosting a ladies' radio show. Madam, today I bring you a cheap, effective recipe for dispelling a vicious cave guard. I can't describe the thing to you, but rest assured, you can defeat it by using 2 sticks of dynamite. You wait until it draws closer and then light the fuse and throw it at it. And then you take cover. Now, don't forget, madam, to take cover, and you'll survive. Survive? Yes, so we can bring you back in another episode featuring another beast. With a steady, wise gaze, the camel stared at me as I gradually went mad. How smart are these animals? But I'm not finished yet. I still have intact those shattered nerves. So tired. And now it's midnight, and the moment has come. Here it is coming for me. I can see it clearly in the moonlight. I ignore the panicking of the 2 camels and the howling of the wolves, and my pounding heart. Should I describe it to you? Well, it is your right, but I simply can't. I imagine it like some kind of huge gorilla or wolf, or something resembling the Incredible Hulk, something we knew nothing of back then. Actually, I can even imagine it like a hologram or a mass of flame, or an unseen ghostly entity. But no, you're wrong. The Assas does not resemble any self-respecting monster. It's something beyond my ability to describe. True, it is a tangible entity, but it looks nothing like any scary thing you can imagine. It's the monster that has yet to be invented. And so, I really can't describe it any better. Simply, it's just heinous, angry, and it wants me, and that's enough for me. I now hold the dynamite in my hand, and weirdly, I'm not shaking and don't feel an ounce of fear. Physiologists say that endorphins produced in the brain in one's dying moments relieve pain as much as possible, but I call it God's mercy, and our opinions do not contradict. I have to light the fuse, but where's my lighter? I've forgotten where I put it when I ran out of cigarettes. Where is it? Ah, here it is. And now, light up, you stupid fuse. Oh, God, it's damp, but it should still light. Finally, and as the flames take hold, I take aim and throw it at him, and then you take cover. Don't forget, madam, to take cover. The explosion happened about 10 meters away from me, the sands blowing back in my face. But I was busy lighting the second fuse, and before the smoke settled, I had thrown the second stick of dynamite in the same direction as the first. And then you take cover. Don't forget, madam, to take cover. The second explosion lit the desert sky, turning night into day. And as the smoke cleared and the sandstorm settled, I found the Assas still coming towards me, slowly and deliberately. Reaching for my gun, I dropped down, taking cover on the sand, and I pulled the trigger. Today I bring you a cheap, effective recipe for dispelling a vicious cave guard. 3 bullets penetrated that thing uselessly. This thing is like a fortress. I'm finished. But at least I won't die without forcing it to chase me for a while. So it can never be said I died like a sheep. Giving it my back, I start running. But it's behind me. I can feel and smell its breath. It's coming closer, and here I am stumbling and getting up and coughing. Once again, I realize my coronary arteries will fail me. The searing pain, the squeezing pain which starts in the left shoulder and crawls like a nightmare down my arm and into my pinky. My life wasn't so bad, but I had hoped to have a different death, a sweeter, more peaceful death than this. But suddenly, I became aware of a shift in the color of the sands. The surface of the sand was softer and more regular. The area was devoid of cacti, which reminded me of something. The surface of quicksand is more consistent and softer than the surrounding sand. So said Mahmoud one time. I knew what I had to do. I circumvented the area carefully, avoiding the suspicious-looking sand. A very dangerous task, as nature does not delineate the difference clearly. But I'm not afraid of anything. I'm no longer afraid. It's following me, and I want to find a spot outside the quicksand. And then if it tries to reach me, the sands will swallow it up. But I can't. I'm running on the edge of quicksand, that thing directly behind me, following in my footsteps. It will always live on the edge, just like me, and I have no chance to change directions. Turning my face, I see the thing for the first time, and monstrous horror attacks me. I have to confess. I must. I really can't focus on where my feet are landing right now. No, I won't scream, because screaming will only feed my panic when I realize the screams are my own, and... 1 second I was running, and the next I found myself 3 or 4 meters inside the area of quicksand. The sands shifted, drawing me down. I was drowning. And anyone who falls into these shifting sands must remember not to try to escape with frantic movements, which will only sink him in farther. Just try to float on your back, totally relaxed. I flipped onto my back, noticing the pale moon gazing down at me with sympathy. I felt my body swirling and then tilting backwards, then floating, slowly, slowly. I stretched my arms out, trying instinctively to widen the surface of my body and thereby lessen the pressure on the sand. It's actually working. And here I heard the sound of the Assas coming for me. Here it is, taking its first steps into this quicksand. But it's mired in the sand, trying frantically to break free, throwing sand all around. But that fool knows nothing about surviving in quicksand. It doesn't know to try to relax. It's sinking, sinking, and the sand dances as it thrashes and shrieks, shaking the desert itself. But it's sinking, sinking. 2 meters from my body, it sinks and disappears entirely. And so you have survived, survived. The Assas is finished. Yes, I'm sure of it. It's not a ghost. It's just an impenetrable monster, one that cannot escape its final prison. Just like me, it requires oxygen. The cave guard is finished and will never return. But I also have not escaped. And soon enough, the sand will cover me and I'll cease to exist. Even if I keep floating for an hour or two, what then? Mahmoud had advised us to wait for rescue. But what rescue? Screaming is futile. In the movies, the hero unties his belt, throws it neatly over a nearby tree branch, and starts crawling towards the shore. But I see nothing on which to throw my belt. Plus, how can I untie my belt without getting sucked down? Not to mention, I'm not wearing a belt. What a dilemma. Am I dreaming? Someone standing at the edge of the quicksand shouted frantically, "Don't move! I'll save you!" And in the moonlight, I saw his face. Karim. Karim, the taboo man whose company I had left a day or so ago. I can't remember anymore, but how and when did he come back? And why? He threw something in my direction, and I caught it instinctively. A rope. A rope. And in a smooth and confident movement, he tied the rope to his camel and prodded the animal to start walking. And very slowly the camel started moving. I was being lifted, nearing the stable sand at the edge of this quicksand. I would survive. And just like that, I found myself collapsing on the sand, trembling and repeating meaningless words. As for Karim, that dear hero, he searched through his camel's saddlebag and brought out a canteen and water and some dates, offering them to me with a stern, expressionless face. No trace of kindness, or happiness, or arrogance. A face made of stone. So we can bring you back in another episode featuring another beast. The finale. Upon returning to the taboo's camp, I realized the men had not left us. They realized we were hopelessly lost and so sent a group of 5 to bring us back against our will, even if it meant using their weapons. Our tracks were overlapping and intertwined, but they were smart enough to realize what had happened. And when they found the professor's body, and then Mahmoud's, they understood I was somewhere facing the Assas, alone. And when they heard the sound of the 2 explosions and the gunfire, they knew I was still alive near the quicksand. And so it went. Karim alone witnessed the events and knew the nightmare was finally over. And if it weren't for him... Nevertheless, he did not seem so optimistic about the cave guard's demise. In his clipped, emotionless way, he told me, "It will come back." "But," I protested, "it is a living being and can't..." "There are others," he said simply, while pointing at the sands beneath our feet. Truth be told, I had fallen in love with these men who were not about talking but rather doing. Their intelligence and centuries-old wisdom exceeded my imagination. But what's down there? What secrets do the drawings on the Tassili cave walls hold? I'll never know unless I gather my courage and return to that last cave someday, to descend the staircase leading down to Atlantis? Maybe. Maybe I'll do so someday, but I still believe the universe holds secrets better left untouched. I had lived difficult days and reached the edge of insanity, but that's all I knew, and I would never understand the universe. Those admirable men were smarter than the professor, and Mahmoud and Ahmed, and me, wiser and more courageous. Taking leave from the taboo was harsh, just many firm handshakes and then leaving and nothing more, for they are men not given to emotion. A difficult journey back to Tripoli awaited me, and another cruel memory took its rightful place on the shelves of my memory. I needed to relax. But I did not know, and how could I, that another surprise awaited me and that another strange experience would soon busy my thoughts for some time. But that's another story. Signed, Dr. Rifat Ismail, Cairo, Egypt, 1992.